welcome back to this I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm Lucy Arish, and this is the Daily Debate. This past Friday marks the 10th anniversary of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein capture. A decade later, the country is still struggling and is at risk of becoming a failed state as the Al-Qaeda militant group continues to traumatize the area through its terrorist activity. Joining me tonight is Avi Melamed, independent Middle East analyst expert. Thank you very much for coming. And our own Yael Lavie, I-24 News morning show host, journalist, and author. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
What do you remember from this day?
Well, I was fortunate enough, if one can call it fortunate. At the time, I was working for ABC News, an American network, and I was based in Baghdad, actually, because there was also a time, I think we have to mention, that American networks still covered Iraq. It was about 6 or 7 months after the war began, and I was actually heading that morning when he was caught. I was heading with a team to do a story about Shiites in Iraq, so we were heading towards the Iraqi-Iranian border. Hold and behold, this is also close to Adawar in the near Tikrit where he was caught, and we got a call on a satellite phone of, they got him. So what I remember from that day is basically, it's one of those moments in journalism where you have more luck than anything else, because you basically end up where the story is happening, where history in many ways is happening. And we got first dibs, so to speak, on the little compound that he was found in. On a bizarre level, I remember the hole in the ground. I remember thinking when we got in there and we got access by the U.S. Army that was very keen on showing how incredible this operation was, how amazingly they caught him. It's not just the hole in the ground, but thinking this dictator was caught in this compound. I remember there were, dirty clothes hanging. Oddly enough, there were dried sausages. He managed to have the time to dry his own sausages. And we were shown all the loot that was found with him, which was $750,000. But it was, you were thinking, This is Saddam Hussein. This is this dictator caught underneath, the ground. But it became a very pivotal day because I think that was the moment where the United States Army and administration very much shifted the attention to the fact that here, our mission has been accomplished. And everybody in the media was forgetting that that's not what people got into Iraq for.
Was the mission accomplished?
It depends who do you ask. If you ask the Iranians, they are very happy with what happened after the American left Iraq. One of the common understanding today in the region is basically that the Americans have basically handed over Iraq to Iran on a platter of silver. We have to remember that in the 80s, both states were tough rivalry. By the way, a couple of weeks ago, they have signed a mutual defense alliance as part of the Middle East. Interesting ins and outs. No, definitely not. I mean, it's quite clear today that the outcome of the American withdrawal from Iraq, I would even say the haste withdrawal of the Americans from Iraq, basically what we see is a lot of aftershock impacts and ramifications that are still shaking the whole region. Basically, Iraq is today in a totally different position, totally different place, and not to the better in many, many ways.
I'm going to maybe say something really urban right now and really outspoken. It seems that sometimes the Americans are acting like bam, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And
it doesn't seem like. I think the devastating thing about Iraq, first of all, is that between 2003 and 2005, and we have to remember that, again, the mission statement to go into Iraq at that time that was sold to the American public and was sold to the world was there were weapons of mass destruction there, and we have to go in and dismantle them. It was very clear very soon after the invasion, and we have to call it an invasion, that no weapons of mass destruction were there. Now, I think, by the way, I have to agree with you that I think Iraq nowadays, a lot of ripples that we see in the Middle East, in my opinion, today are because of that war. I think the Sunni Shiite battles that are in the Middle East are a direct result of that war. And also the deposing of Saddam Hussein, because at the end of the day, it's 10 years to that, I think that did not bode well for the Arab world. Because we have to remember that when he was, no matter how much his people hated him, those pictures of him being dragged out, fingers looking through his hair, were humiliating. And were humiliating to Iraqis.
It's a lack of understanding of the Arab culture. It's a lack of understanding of Islam. It's a lack of, and even the day that he was executed, it was the day of the holiday. So it just seems that again, this policy, this American policy, this patronizing sometimes about, okay, we did the thing, we caught him, we did it, and after us, whatever happens, happens.
Let me remind you that the day he was caught, there was a press conference.
We got him, was the line.
We got him was the line, and one of the journalists, Iraqi journalists, was jumping of joy. I remember that conference very well. People were chanting, in the streets. A couple of years later on today, when you look in the Arab world, there is a very strong sentiment of people that basically say something like, well, you should have left Saddam Hussein. You should have dealt with that. But it was
only in that press conference, I got to tell you, that when we were in Tikrit and coming out of the whole American media that I worked for was just interested in what the military had to say, but we didn't, we were adamant about going out into Tikrit. And I interviewed a group of about, 10, 40-year-old men who already that day said exactly that. Said, you know what, we didn't like Saddam, but it was for us to bring him down. This is humiliating. These pictures that we are seeing are humiliating, and it was our job to do so.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that is what was projected to the Arab world. Plus, we cannot forget, there was an invading army in Iraq. There were people in different uniforms, in American uniforms, and that has an effect on the country sitting there for almost 10 years. And, now they're out, and the country, I personally think it's a failed state. I personally think it's a complete mess that, needs to be addressed more. I think just today, 21 people were killed there in a bombing. So, it keeps on happening.
There is something interesting talking about humiliation. When Osama bin Laden was taken down, and you could read all the comments made by many people in the Arab world, one of the major comments that was made was, well, he had it coming because he was painting Islam black, but why did you have to do it that way?
Yeah.
The sense of humiliation was in between the lines, you could sense it.
Who is not learning the lesson? The Americans, the Arab countries, Muslims around the world? Who is not learning the lessons from these kind of acts?
I would say both. Because, on the other hand, we have to remember, for example, the story that happened, the riots that happened after the publishing of this ridiculous movie that was made in the States about the Prophet, and the reaction in the Arab world and the Muslim world. And some people, and mostly in the West, and rightfully so said to the Muslim guys, grow up. I mean, control your reaction. It's only this ridiculous movie. You don't have to jump to the streets every time something is insulting you, because there is a time that comes that you must, to grow up a little bit. So in a way, it's like misdialogue of culture, sort of speaking. You could see it very clearly in this episode.
Maybe the level of insult is high because there seems to be a perception that the West or the United States is trying to force their way of life. I mean, look at the Arab Spring, which I also think is some sort of a result of what happened in Iraq. And everybody's burying it and calling it an Arab winter already. Right. Not necessarily the case. I mean, that's personally my opinion. I think that, in countries like Egypt, it's going through its own transformation and it needs the army. But the United States, raised its hand, no, this is not democracy. But there won't be able to be ever to be a democracy in the Middle East in the Western way.
This is exactly what I'm asking. Can Islam, can the Arab countries accept democracy like the Western world? Because it seems that the West is always trying to impose this way of life when actually they cannot understand it, or maybe need years to start being educated to this way of life.
I want to remind you something, and I'm always saying it to people, mostly from the West, because I'm talking mostly to people from the West in addition to people from the Muslim world. The West was not born as a democracy. It took the West hundreds of years to become a democracy. So if somebody is expecting the Arab world tomorrow morning, or the Muslim world, to become a USA-style democracy, that is totally illusion. By the way, I'm sharing your point of view.
No, the French Revolution took 15 years, bloody, or 15 to 20 years, bloody years of of transformation until it reached the birth of democracy, so to speak. And it may not have the end result, I know, of what we in the West perceive as democracy, which, by the way, I would say is not necessarily working that well as well. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I agree with you, because I believe I could see down the road, not tomorrow. It will take time, but I see as you say, the transformation that takes place today within parts of the Arab world, and you could see the seeds of something which is enormously important in the Arab society, and that is the first seeds of what's maybe going to be the emerge of a real civil society in the Arab world. When this thing is going to take place, then you could start talking about democracy.
And it will take time, which again, that's one thing the Middle East has proven, I think, is that time takes time here. You know, and it needs to be given that rather than we in the West, or be it the great powers, imposing their agenda of if it's not happening right this second, then it's not it.
But how much time? How much time? Because we see that the situation in Iraq is actually deteriorating as we speak.
Well, the problem in Iraq is that it was, I think, you know, and nobody will stand up and say it in the United States, let alone, you know, in the administrations, that was a clear-cut invasion that had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, that had nothing to do, I mean, it was sold that way. It was the attempt to go in and harness and use the excuse of 9/11 and whatnot to go into that country. And we see the result of it today. I mean, I personally think that Iraq, I don't want to say a lost cause, but it's in such bad shape that, you know, who knows, time will tell. It's who wins Shia Sunni, you know, in the Middle East in the next several years, in my, you know.
No, definitely. This is
opinion.
one of the major axes that is today playing a major role in shaping this region, and will play an enormously important role in shaping this region for the future. But, you know, going back to your question, whenever I'm briefing people from the West, talking about the Middle East, after 5 minutes or so, the question is, okay, what's the solution?
Yeah.
And I'm saying, guys, what's the rush? This is the Middle East. You know, people are, the mindset of people here is totally different. You are talking about solutions. You are end gaining, sort of speaking. You are oriented already to find the solution, while people here are going through the process. You know, I'm always saying about the Middle East that the Middle East is the most stable thing in the Middle East is temporary, and vice versa. The most temporary thing is very stable and constant.
And I think the education also has to come within the people of the West. I think it's up to the Americans possibly and the West to educate their people that the Middle East is not the exact same thing as America, and it never will be. It never will be.
We're seeing the leaders that went down one after the other. We see Saddam Hussein, we see Osama bin Laden, a leader, more of a terrorist. We see Gaddafi, we see Mubarak. These are different kind of leaders than the leaders that are coming into the arena right now in the Middle East. What is the difference between these leaders and the past ones?
Well, though, I think there's quite a lack of new leaders currently in those countries, and that is the problem. And this is the great debate of what is the transformation. And you know, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my opinion is that, you know, these are countries that were used so much to dictatorships that that's what they could deal with. And the emergence of a new, you know, you see at the end of the day, it's the tribes, they are triumphant. It's people fighting for the control. Egypt, to me, is always an example of, you know, the army there is helping facilitate the need of the people. It's not necessarily right, it's not necessarily how we'd like to see it, but I think that's the new leadership in many ways in Egypt until it balances off.
Avi?
When you look at the Arab states today, you see something very interesting. Egypt, you have Sisi. Okay?
Okay.
In Libya, no one.
No one.
In Syria, no one.
Yeah.
In fact, you have a new dictator, new old dictator, in a place that we are talking about today specifically, and it's called Iraq. His name is Nouri al-Maliki. The prime minister of Iraq today is to a large extent a dictator.
That's the only way he could survive the last decade.
Apparently. No. So it's very interesting when you are talking about the emerge of a new leaders. Not yet. Apparently, we have to skip some kind of like a level or a layer, or to move forward to the next generation to watch these leaders rising up. By the way, I think that it will be very interesting to follow very closely to see what today appears to be the upcoming leadership that emerge in Syria, mostly among the Muslim-affiliated militants groups that are involved in the fight in Syria. I'm talking about people like Zahran Aloush and other people there in Syria. It's very interesting to see because these people are going to play an enormously important role.
Except for that in Syria, it seems like the West is intent on keeping Assad in power. That it seems like there's been some sort of a decision, you know, calculated to keep him in place, that he's not going anywhere.
Who do you think is gaining, before we're closing this discussion, who do you think is gaining from the situation right now in Iraq?
Oh my God, no one. It's Iran basically.
Definitely.
Iran is gaining. You know, Iran has gained, you know, from the start. In many ways, it was handed to them on a platter. And if, you know, Shiite was wise, they completely take over, then we should all take notice.
Yeah.
The major concerns about Iraq, very briefly, what's going on in Syria, the involvement of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and the impact on the Jordanian borders.
We hear the music. Thank you very much for this discussion. We're going out for a break, and then we're back with a one-on-one.